After Adam sinned, God provided redemption for fallen man, but he has not provided any redemption for fallen angels. Why is this? Here are several other difficult passages related to the sovereignty of God and the responsibility of man. In Romans 9, Paul makes some very strong statements about the sovereignty of God. He says, God has mercy on whomever he wills, and he hardens whomever he wills. You will say to me then, why does he still find fault? For who can resist his will? But who are you, O man, to answer back to God? Will what is molded say to its molder, why have you made me like this? Has the potter no right over the clay to make out of the same lump one vessel for honorable use and another for dishonorable use? What if God, desiring to show his wrath and to make known his power, has endured with much patience vessels of wrath fitted for destruction, in order to make known the riches of his glory for vessels of mercy, which he has prepared beforehand for glory, even us whom he has called, not from the Jews only, but also from the Gentiles. Romans 9, 8-24. Wow, that's a very serious passage. But this passage can only properly be understood by embracing both perspectives of God's sovereignty and man's responsibility. Paul focuses here entirely on God's side. From his side, God did all this. But when we read the original stories of Jacob and Esau in Genesis, and then Moses and Pharaoh in Exodus, we see a lot of evidence that from their side, they did what they freely chose to do. At the same time, some have worried that passages like Romans 9 will encourage fear and insecurity in the believer. But in reality, the truth of the sovereignty of God, when properly taught, produces a very strong assurance in the believer's heart. The people of God will be empowered to always trust in God, knowing that God is able to cause all things to work together for our good and for his glory. God can do this because he is sovereign. Also, a balanced understanding of election will produce a deep faith in the believer, because he knows that by the grace of God, the elect will endure to the end and ultimately be saved. From our side, Christians must persevere, trust God, and endure. Yet, it's an established fact that those whom God has chosen before the foundation of the world to be saved will persevere and will receive eternal glory in the end. The second passage we'll look at now is 1 Timothy 5:21. Paul says, "In the presence of God and of Christ Jesus and of the elect angels." As we saw previously, angels are genuinely responsible for their actions, like we are. Angels are moral beings. The New Testament refers to the angels who sinned, and we know that only a moral being can sin, and only moral beings can be judged for their sin. After Adam sinned, God provided redemption for fallen man. But he has not provided any redemption for fallen angels. Why is this? First, God has provided redemption for fallen men, but not for fallen angels, simply because in his sovereign good pleasure, he planned it would be that way. God can give his grace to who he will. And in his sovereign will and purpose, he has decided not to provide redemption for fallen angels. Second, God's mercy has already been applied in the case of the angels in restraining his elect angels from sinning in the first place. In the case of man, God's elect are redeemed out of a state of sin and misery. But in the case of angels, God's elect were prevented from falling into a state of sin and eternal misery. Consequently, there will be no redemption for fallen angels. Let's also look at Acts 18, 9-10, in which God encouraged Paul when he was in Corinth. It says, "And the Lord said to Paul one night in a vision, 'Do not be afraid, but go on speaking and do not be silent, for I am with you and no one will attack you to harm you. For I have many in this city who are my people.'" Wow. God told Paul that there were many in the city who were chosen by him and would be saved. But some have worried that the truth of God's sovereignty will discourage the preaching of the gospel. If the elect will be saved anyway, why preach the gospel? Well, this ignores the relationship between the means and the end. God has foreordained that his chosen will be saved through the preaching of the gospel. Jesus and Paul deeply believed in the sovereignty of God, and yet they continually preached the gospel to everyone who would listen. And the Bible is clear that if we don't preach the gospel, no one will be saved. Paul says this in Romans 10. "For everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. How then will they call on him in whom they have not believed? And how are they to believe in him of whom they've never heard? And how are they to hear without someone preaching? And how are they to preach unless they're sent? As it's written, how beautiful are the feet of those who preach the good news." So then, faith comes from hearing, and hearing through the word of Christ. It's our great privilege to bring people to God. God has ordained that those whom he has chosen to be saved will be saved by the preaching of the gospel. The same Bible that teaches the sovereignty of God also commands us to proclaim the gospel to the whole creation and to all nations. We are to freely announce that the gospel is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes. This is the gospel. Everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. Romans 10:13. So, far from being discouraged about preaching the gospel, when we properly understand the sovereignty of God, we can preach God's words with the greatest assurance and confidence that some people will respond to it because God has ordained that the elect will be saved.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe to our channel for more teaching videos like this. For more information about LeaderSource, please visit our website, www.leadersource.org.